They blocked the old man at his comrade's funereal. Then the four-star general stopped everything for him. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The heavy, ornate, wrought iron gates of Arlington National Cemetery stood as a formidable barrier, a line between the bustling world of the living and the hallowed, silent city of the dead. Samuel Sam Miller, 87 years old, clutched a small, worn envelope in his liver-spotted hand, his knuckles white. Inside was a faded photograph of two young men in ill-fitting uniforms, grinning boyishly, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, the backdrop a war-torn landscape Sam tried daily to forget. Today, he was here to say goodbye to the other man in that photograph, General Arthur Pendleton, his lifelong friend, his brother in arms, a four-star giant of a man who was finally being laid to rest with all the pomp and ceremony befitting his rank. Sam, however, was not a four-star general. He was a retired postal worker from a small town in Pennsylvania, dressed in his Sunday best, a slightly threadbare but clean suit that smelled faintly of mothballs, a muted tie his late wife, Clara, had given him 30 Christmases ago. He had taken 3 buses and a very expensive taxi to get here, a journey that had started before dawn. As he approached the main security checkpoint, a phalanx of young, stern-faced military police officers in dress blues barred his way. Their uniforms were crisp, their movements sharp, their eyes scanning the arriving dignitaries with an air of officious importance. "Sir, invitation and identification, please." One of them, a corporal with a name tag reading Davies, said, his voice devoid of warmth, his eyes flicking dismissively over Sam's modest attire. Sam fumbled for the simple funeral notice he'd received, a standard card sent to Arthur's wider circle of acquaintances. He didn't have a gold-embossed invitation. He wasn't on any VIP list. "I'm Samuel Miller," he said, his voice a little shaky from the journey and the emotion of the day. "Arthur, General Pendleton. He was my oldest friend. We served together." Corporal Davies barely glanced at the notice. "Sir, this is a restricted area for authorized personnel and invited family guests only. General Pendleton's funeral is a matter of national security. I don't see your name on the primary access roster." Another MP, a sergeant named Wilkes with a granite jaw and impatient eyes, stepped forward. "Look, old man," Wilkes said, his tone condescending, "we've got a lot of important people coming through here. Senators, ambassadors, the Joint Chiefs. Unless you've got a specific high-level clearance, you're going to have to wait with the general public outside the main gates, if there's even room." Sam's heart sank. Outside the main gates? He had traveled so far, endured so much, just to be here, to offer a final, silent farewell to the man who had saved his life, the man with whom he shared secrets no one else on earth knew. He felt a flush of humiliation, the sting of being dismissed, of being made to feel insignificant. The soldiers, young enough to be his grandsons, saw not a decorated war hero, a comrade of the deceased, but simply an old man, out of place and inconvenience. "But I need to be here," Sam stammered, the words catching in his throat. "Arthur would have wanted me here." Wilkes scoffed, a small, cruel sound. "Yeah, they all say that. Move along, sir. You're holding up the line." He gestured dismissively towards a distant, roped-off area where a small crowd of ordinary onlookers was beginning to gather, far from the honor guard, far from the gravesite, far from Arthur. Sam stood frozen, the worn envelope crushed in his hand, the weight of 87 years and a forgotten war pressing down on him. Before we uncover the incredible truth about Samuel Miller and the astonishing turn of events that would soon silence this hallowed ground, tell us, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that every soldier, regardless of rank or recognition, deserves our utmost respect, especially in their final farewell to a comrade, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next is a testament to the enduring power of brotherhood and the honor that can be found in the most unexpected of heroes. The story of how one four-star general stopped everything for a forgotten old man is one you will not want to miss. Samuel Miller's journey to Arlington had been an odyssey of quiet determination. He'd risen at 3 in the morning, his old bones protesting with every movement. Clara, his wife of 52 years, had been gone for 5 now, and her absence was a constant, dull ache, especially on days like this, days that dredged up the past. She would have known what to say, how to navigate this. She would have pressed his suit perfectly, made sure his shoes were shined, and slipped a couple of her famous oatmeal cookies into his pocket for the trip. Instead, he had fumbled with the iron himself, nicked his chin shaving, and breakfast had been a piece of dry toast he could barely swallow. The first bus, the local one, had been late. The connection at the regional terminal had been a chaotic rush. The long-haul Greyhound had smelled of disinfectant and despair. Through it all, Sam had clutched the small envelope, the photograph inside a tangible link to a past that felt both a million miles away and as immediate as his own breathing. He and Arthur Pendleton. Chalk and cheese, everyone had said. Sam, the quiet farm boy from rural Pennsylvania. Arthur, the charismatic scion of a wealthy New England family, destined for great things even then. Yet, in the crucible of war, in the frozen hell of a forgotten Korean mountain pass whose name was now just a footnote in history books, they had forged a bond stronger than steel. They had seen things, done things, endured things that no young man should ever have to. They had saved each other's lives more than once. After the war, their paths had diverged. Arthur, with his ambition and brilliance, had stayed in the army, rising steadily through the ranks, becoming a decorated general, a respected strategist, a public figure. Sam had returned to Pennsylvania, married Clara, worked for the post office for 40 years, raised 2 children, and lived a quiet, unassuming life. They had kept in touch, sporadically at first, then more regularly as the years passed and the memories of their shared youth grew more precious. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls, a rare visit when Arthur's duties brought him nearby. Sam had never felt envious of Arthur's success, only proud. He knew the man beneath the uniform, the friend who still, in his letters, signed off as Artie. And now Artie was gone. Sam had read the obituary in the national newspaper, a long, glowing tribute to General Arthur Pendleton, hero of 3 wars, architect of modern military strategy. There was no mention of Sergeant Samuel Miller, the man who had once dragged a wounded Lieutenant Pendleton 3 miles through enemy territory under a hail of machine gun fire. Sam didn't expect there to be. That wasn't why he was here. He was here for Artie. As he stood before the imposing gates of Arlington, facing the dismissive arrogance of Corporal Davies and Sergeant Wilkes, Sam felt a familiar wave of invisibility wash over him. It was a feeling he'd grown accustomed to over the years. The world celebrated the generals, the policymakers, the ones who made the grand pronouncements. The sergeants, the corporals, the privates, the ones who did the bleeding and the dying, were often just statistics, forgotten cogs in the great machine of war and history. He tried again, his voice firmer this time, though still quiet. "Sergeant, I understand you have your orders. But General Pendleton and we were in the chosen reservoir together. Company B, 2nd Infantry Division. He was my platoon leader." He saw a flicker of something in Corporal Davies' eyes. Confusion? A dawning, reluctant interest? The chosen reservoir. Even these young soldiers would know that name. It was a legend in military history, a testament to unbelievable hardship and incredible courage. But Sergeant Wilkes quickly quashed it. "Sir, with all due respect, a lot of people claim to have known the general. We have a very strict protocol. The family has requested a private, secure service for the initial interment. If you wish to pay your respects, the cemetery will be open to the general public later this afternoon. You can visit the grave then." "Later this afternoon?" Sam repeated, the words like ashes in his mouth. "But the service, the honors, I want to be there for that." For him. Wilkes sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You are obstructing the flow of official guests." He gestured towards the growing line of black sedans and official vehicles now pulling up to the checkpoint. Sam looked at the polished cars, the tinted windows, the important-looking people emerging, their invitations readily accepted, their passage swift and unquestioned. He was just an old man in a worn suit, a relic from a forgotten war, holding a faded photograph. The injustice of it, the sheer, unthinking cruelty, was a fresh wound. He wasn't asking for a place of honor. He wasn't asking for recognition. He was just asking to say goodbye to his friend. Sam felt a profound weariness settle over him, a fatigue that went deeper than the long journey. He clutched the envelope containing the photograph a little tighter, its worn edges a small comfort. He was accustomed to being overlooked, to being one of the faceless many. But this, being barred from Artie's final farewell, felt like a betrayal not just of his own grief, but of the bond they had shared, a bond forged in the unimaginable crucible of combat. He looked at Sergeant Wilkes, at the younger Corporal Davies, their faces impassive, reflecting only their orders, their perceived authority. There was no malice in their eyes, he thought, just a bureaucratic indifference, a rigid adherence to a list that could not possibly account for the complexities of a life lived, of friendships that spanned decades and transcended rank. "Is there anyone I can speak to?" Sam asked, his voice hoarse. "A supervisor? Someone from the General's family liaison." Wilkes shook his head, his patience clearly exhausted. "Sir, the family liaisons are with the family, as they should be. And my supervisor, Captain Harris, is overseeing the entire security detail for the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense, who are expected shortly. He doesn't have time for individual queries." The implication was clear. Sam was not important enough to warrant Captain Harris's attention. The line of black cars behind him was growing longer, the air filled with the quiet hum of powerful engines and the murmur of hushed, important conversations. Sam knew he was causing a delay, an inconvenience. He felt the stares of the other arrivals, some curious, some impatient. He was an anomaly, a disruption in the carefully orchestrated solemnity of the day. He was about to turn away, to retreat to that distant, roped-off area with the other onlookers, his heart a leaden weight in his chest, when a voice, surprisingly gentle, cut through the official brusqueness. "Sergeant Wilkes, what seems to be the hold-up here?" It was a younger officer, a lieutenant, judging by the single silver bar on his collar. He had approached from a side tent, a clipboard in his hand, his expression one of mild concern. Wilkes immediately stiffened, his demeanor shifting to one of crisp, military alertness. "Sir, this gentleman, Mr. Miller, claims to be a friend of General Pendleton, but is not on the primary access list. We've advised him of the public viewing times." The lieutenant, whose name tag read Chun, turned to Sam, his eyes kind, a stark contrast to the hardness in Wilkes's. "Mr. Miller, is it?" he asked. "May I see your notice, please?" Sam, grateful for even this small show of courtesy, handed over the funeral card. Lieutenant Chin studied it for a moment, then looked at Sam, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You said you served with General Pendleton, sir?" "Yes, Lieutenant," Sam replied, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "Korea. Chosen. He was Lieutenant Pendleton then. I was his radio operator for a time." Lieutenant Chin's eyebrows rose slightly. Chosen. The name still resonated with a particular kind of awe and horror in military circles. "That was a difficult campaign, Mr. Miller," Chun said, his voice tinged with respect. "Indeed it was, Lieutenant. Indeed it was." Before Chin could say more, Sergeant Wilkes interjected. "Sir, with all due respect, we have protocols. The Secretary is due any minute. We can't hold up the arrival of primary dignitaries for unverified claims." Lieutenant Chun frowned, clearly unhappy with Wilkes's tone, but he also understood the pressures of the situation. He looked at Sam, then at the growing line of official vehicles. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice apologetic, "Sergeant Wilkes is correct about the security protocols for this phase of the ceremony. I'm afraid I can't override them at this checkpoint without authorization from Captain Harris. However," he paused, then lowered his voice slightly. "If you wouldn't mind waiting just over there," he gestured to a slightly less crowded spot near a large oak tree, just inside the gates but still away from the main procession route. "I will personally speak to Captain Harris as soon as there's an opportunity. I can't promise anything, but I will try." It wasn't much, but it was more than Sam had expected. It was a sliver of hope, a small act of human kindness in a morning that had been largely devoid of it. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you very much." He moved slowly towards the oak tree, his legs feeling unsteady. He watched as Lieutenant Shun spoke earnestly into his radio, then hurried off towards the main arrival area where a new flurry of activity indicated the arrival of even more important figures. The funeral procession itself was beginning to form near the chapel. The caisson, drawn by 6 magnificent black horses, stood ready. The honor guard, their uniforms immaculate, their movements precise, waited in solemn formation. The strains of a military band, practicing a mournful dirge, drifted on the morning air. Sam leaned against the rough bark of the oak tree, feeling suddenly very old and very alone. He could see the chapel, the honor guard, the beginning of the solemn parade of flags and dignitaries. He was close, yet so far. He pulled the faded photograph from its envelope, his fingers tracing the smiling faces of the 2 young men, frozen in time, full of life and ignorant of the horrors that awaited them. "Artie," he whispered, "I'm here, old friend. I'm trying." He didn't know if Lieutenant Chin's efforts would bear fruit, if Captain Harris would even deign to consider his plea. But for now, he would wait. He would wait for Artie. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Sam watched as a succession of somber-faced men and women in dark suits and military uniforms were ushered through the checkpoint, their passage swift and unquestioned. He saw senators, congressmen, foreign dignitaries, their importance announced by the flurry of aides and security personnel that surrounded them. Each arrival was a fresh reminder of his own perceived insignificance. He tried to focus on Arthur, on the good times they had shared, both during the war and in the long years after. He remembered their leave in Tokyo, 2 young, bewildered farm boys let loose in a vibrant, alien city. He remembered the birth of Arthur's first child, how Arthur had proudly shown him the baby pictures. He remembered Arthur's steady presence at Clara's funeral, his quiet strength a comfort in Sam's darkest hour. These memories were a balm, but they also sharpened the pain of his current exclusion. He owed it to Arthur to be there, to bear witness to his final honors. The military band struck up a solemn march. The caisson, bearing Arthur's flag-draped coffin, began its slow, dignified journey towards the gravesite. The honor guard fell in step, their movements a testament to discipline and respect. Sam's heart ached. He was missing it. He was missing the final tribute to his friend. He saw Lieutenant Shun in the distance, speaking animatedly with a taller officer who wore the silver oak leaves of a captain, Captain Harris, presumably. Shun gestured in Sam's direction, his expression earnest. Captain Harris listened, his face stern, occasionally glancing towards Sam with an unreadable expression. After a few moments, Captain Harris shook his head curtly and turned away, dismissing Chun. Lieutenant Chin's shoulders slumped. He looked over at Sam and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his eyes filled with regret. The sliver of hope Sam had clung to extinguished. It was over. He wouldn't be allowed in. He had failed. Failed Arthur. Failed himself. Tears welled in Sam's eyes, hot and unexpected. He hadn't cried in years, not since Clara passed. He hastily brushed them away with the back of his hand, angry at his own weakness. He was a soldier, damn it. Soldiers didn't cry. But this felt different. This wasn't the heat of battle or the grief of loss. This was the cold, hard reality of being forgotten, of being deemed unworthy. Just as he was about to turn away, to begin the long, lonely journey back to Pennsylvania, a new convoy of black SUVs, even more imposing than the previous ones, swept through the gates, sirens wailing softly, lights flashing. The security detail around this arrival was visibly larger, more intense. These were clearly individuals of the highest importance. Captain Harris and Sergeant Wilkes snapped to attention, their earlier officiousness replaced by a palpable deference. From the lead vehicle emerged a figure Sam recognized instantly, even after all these years, even from this distance. It was General Wallace Thorne, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a 4-star general renowned for his strategic brilliance, his unwavering integrity, and his deep respect for the traditions of the service. Sam had seen him on television many times, had read his articles on military policy. He was a legend in his own right. General Thorne, his uniform a constellation of stars and ribbons, surveyed the scene with a keen, appraising eye. He was there to deliver the primary eulogy for his friend and mentor, General Pendleton. His gaze swept past the assembled dignitaries, past the honor guard, and then, inexplicably, it seemed to pause, to linger on the solitary figure of the old man standing by the oak tree. Sam, instinctively, straightened his shoulders, a lifetime of military discipline asserting itself even in his despair. He didn't expect the general to notice him, let alone acknowledge him. He was just another face in the periphery. But then, something extraordinary happened. General Thorne, instead of proceeding directly to the gravesite, altered his course. He began walking, not towards the assembled VIPs, but directly towards Sam. Captain Harris and Sergeant Wilkes exchanged alarmed glances. What was the chairman doing? The entire carefully choreographed ceremony was about to be disrupted. Aides scurried, security personnel tensed, but General Thorne walked on, his gaze fixed on Samuel Miller, his expression unreadable. The world seemed to hold its breath. Do you believe that true leadership means noticing the forgotten, even in the midst of grandeur? Or is protocol paramount, especially at events of national significance? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding this story of unexpected honor compelling, please subscribe for more narratives that uplift the human spirit. General Wallace Thorne approached Samuel Miller with a purposeful stride, the crowd of dignitaries and military personnel parting before him, as if by an invisible force. The air crackled with an unspoken tension. Captain Harris looked as if he might faint. Sergeant Wilkes and Corporal Davies seemed to shrink into their uniforms, suddenly very aware of their earlier conduct. Sam stood by the oak tree, his heart pounding, a mixture of disbelief and a strange, dawning apprehension filling him. Why was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff walking towards him? General Thorne stopped a few feet from Sam. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. The four-star general, a figure of immense power and global influence, and the forgotten postal worker, a relic of a bygone war. Yet, in that shared gaze, something profound passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience, of sacrifices made, of a brotherhood that transcended rank and time. "Mr. Samuel Miller?" General Thorne asked, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying easily in the sudden hush. It was not the booming command of a general, but the respectful inquiry of one man to another. Sam swallowed, his throat dry. "Yes, General," he managed to reply, his voice barely a whisper. "It has been many years," General Thorne said, a faint, almost sad smile touching his lips. "Too many. I almost didn't recognize you without your helmet and half a ton of mud on your face." Sam stared, his mind reeling. The general remembered him? Not just his name, but, "Sir," Sam stammered. You know me?" General Thorne's smile widened slightly. "Know you, Sergeant Miller? Every soldier who served under Lieutenant Arthur Pendleton in Baker Company during that winter in Korea knows the name Samuel Miller. Or should. Artie. General Pendleton. He spoke of you often. Very often. He never forgot." He paused, his gaze sweeping briefly over the stunned faces of Captain Harris and his security detail, then returning to Sam. "He told me once," General Thorne continued, his voice now carrying a new weight, a new authority, that he owed his life and the lives of half his platoon to a young radio operator who, under unimaginable fire, crawled through a frozen hell to repair a damaged comm line, restoring contact with battalion headquarters and bringing in the artillery support that saved them all. An act of valor for which, due to the chaos of battle and the loss of commanding officers, he never received the recognition he was due. Sam felt a flush creep up his neck. He hadn't thought of that day in decades, had buried it deep with so many other horrors. "General, I just did my duty," he mumbled, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, the public recounting of a moment he considered simply part of soldier's job. Indeed, You did, Sergeant Miller, General Thorne said, his voice firm. And your duty saved many lives, including the life of the man we are here to honor today. A man who went on to become one of this nation's finest military leaders, thanks in no small part to your courage on that forgotten mountainside. He then turned, his gaze now like ice, fixing on Captain Harris and Sergeant Wilkes. Captain, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Was there some impediment to Sergeant Miller joining us for General Pendleton's service? Captain Harris swallowed hard, his face pale. Sir, General, sir, Mr. Miller was not on the pre-approved access roster for the primary seating area. We were following protocol, sir. Protocol, General Thorne repeated, the word dripping with scorn. You mistake your duty, Captain. Protocol is meant to ensure order and respect, not to bar a hero, a brother-in-arms of the deceased, from paying his final respects. Your protocol, he made the word sound like an obscenity, has caused profound disrespect to the memory of General Pendleton and to the honor of this distinguished veteran. He then looked directly at Sergeant Wilkes and Corporal Davies, who seemed to be trying to melt into the pavement. And you too. Your conduct, as reported to me by Lieutenant Shun, who, I might add, showed commendable initiative and compassion, was an absolute disgrace to that uniform you wear. You will report to your commanding officer for reassignment and remedial training in basic human decency and the history of the United States Army, effective immediately. The public dressing down was brutal, delivered with the quiet, controlled fury of a man accustomed to his orders being obeyed without question. Wilkes and Davies looked utterly crushed, their earlier arrogance shattered. Lieutenant Shun, standing a short distance away, tried to maintain a neutral expression, but Sam saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. General Thorne then turned back to Sam, his expression softening once more. Sergeant Miller, he said, his voice now filled with warmth and respect. It would be my distinct honor if you would accompany me. There's a seat reserved for you at the front with General Pendleton's family. They are expecting you. Arthur made sure of it in his final arrangements. There seems to have been a regrettable administrative oversight in communicating that to the ground staff. He offered his arm to Sam. Shall we, Sergeant? Samuel Miller, the forgotten hero, the old man in the worn suit, looked at the four-star general, at the offered arm, at the sea of stunned, watching faces. And for the first time that day, a small, tentative smile touched his own lips. Thank you, General, he said, his voice stronger now. Thank you. The sight of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff personally escorting the unassuming old man towards the front rows of the assembled mourners sent a ripple of astonishment and then dawning comprehension through the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was this Samuel Miller? What was his connection to the legendary General Pendleton? A connection so profound that it warranted such an extraordinary intervention from the nation's highest-ranking military officer. As they walked, General Thorne leaned in and spoke quietly to Sam. Already left specific instructions, Sam. A letter. He knew you'd come, if you were able. He wanted you at the front. He even left a particular passage he wanted you to read, if you felt up to it. Something from your old days. Sam's eyes widened. Artie had remembered. Even in his final plans, he had made a place for his old friend, his quiet, forgotten comrade. The administrative oversight was clearly more than that. It was a failure of the system, a failure of respect, that General Thorne was now so powerfully correcting. When they reached the front pew, where General Pendleton's widow, Eleanor, a woman of immense grace and fortitude, sat with her children and grandchildren, a space had already been made. Eleanor Pendleton, her eyes red-rimmed, but her composure intact, looked up as they approached. A soft gasp escaped her lips when she saw Sam. Sam, she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and profound relief. Oh, Sam, Arthur would be so. He is so happy you're here. She reached out and took Sam's free hand, her grip surprisingly strong. We were so worried when you weren't at the family gathering last night. The staff, they said they had no record. Her voice trailed off, a hint of the frustration she must have felt. General Thorne interjected smoothly. There were some regrettable communication issues at the gate, Eleanor. "But Sergeant Miller is here now," as Arthur wished. He gently guided Sam into the empty seat beside Mrs. Pendleton. The service, which had been paused in stunned silence, slowly resumed. But the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The focus had shifted, subtly but profoundly. It was still a tribute to a great general, but it was now also a testament to the enduring bonds of ordinary soldiers, to the quiet heroism that often goes unrecorded in the grand narratives of war. The chaplain, visibly moved by what he had witnessed, altered his planned eulogy, speaking not just of General Pendleton's strategic brilliance, but of the bedrock of courage and sacrifice displayed by the men he had led, men like Sergeant Samuel Miller. When it came time for the readings, Eleanor Pendleton turned to Sam, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "Sam," she said softly, "Arthur left this for you. He said you'd know what it was." She handed him a small, worn leather-bound New Testament, the kind issued to soldiers during the Korean War. Tucked inside, marking a specific passage, was a faded press poppy. Sam's hands trembled as he took the book. He knew this poppy. He had picked it from a battlefield in the spring of '51, a small, defiant splash of red in a landscape of gray devastation, and had given it to Artie, a symbol of hope, of life persisting even in the midst of death. Arthur had kept it all these years. He opened the book to the marked passage, Psalm 91. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." His voice, raspy at first, gained strength as he read the familiar words they had often recited together in their foxholes, a shield against the fear that gnawed at them in the long, cold nights. As he read, his gaze drifted to Arthur's flag-draped coffin. He wasn't just reading scripture. He was speaking to his friend, a final conversation across the veil. The impact on the assembled dignitaries was profound. They had come to honor a four-star general, a pillar of the military establishment. They were now confronted with the raw, unvarnished truth of that general's beginnings, with the quiet, almost anonymous heroism of the men who had fought alongside him, who had enabled his survival and his subsequent greatness. Many eyes were wet. Many throats were tight with emotion. The carefully constructed edifice of rank and protocol had, for a moment, dissolved, revealing the shared humanity, the shared vulnerability that lay beneath. After Sam finished reading, there was a moment of profound silence, more eloquent than any applause. Then, General Wallace Thorne himself stepped to the podium to deliver the main eulogy. He spoke of Arthur Pendleton's brilliance, his leadership, his dedication to his country. But he began and ended his tribute by speaking of Sergeant Samuel Miller. "Greatness in leadership," General Thorne said, his voice ringing with conviction, his eyes meeting Sam's, "is not achieved in a vacuum. It is built upon the courage, the loyalty, and the often unsung sacrifices of those who serve in the ranks." General Pendleton knew this. He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the men who stood with him in the darkest of hours. Men like Sergeant Miller, whose quiet valor represents the very bedrock of our armed forces, the spirit that truly makes this nation great. The remainder of the funeral service proceeded with a new, deeper layer of solemnity and meaning. The traditional three-volley salute cracked through the air, each shot a sharp punctuation mark in the story of a life of service. The lone bugler played taps, the mournful notes drifting over the silent, grieving assembly, each note seeming to carry the weight of history, of sacrifices made, of friendships forged in fire. Samuel Miller sat beside Eleanor Pendleton, a quiet pillar of strength for her, even as his own heart ached with a grief that was both fresh and decades old. He felt a sense of peace, too, a feeling that he had, at last, properly honored his friend. The earlier humiliation at the gates, the callous dismissal by the young guards, now seemed a distant, insignificant irritant, completely overshadowed by the profound respect and recognition he had received, not because of rank or status, but because of a shared history, a shared sacrifice, a bond that even death could not break. After the flag was meticulously folded and presented to Mrs. Pendleton, and as the mourners began to slowly disperse, Many of them made a point of approaching Sam. Senators who had earlier hurried past him now shook his hand with genuine respect, their aides looking on with newfound understanding. High-ranking officers, men and women who commanded divisions and fleets, paused to offer a quiet word of gratitude, to acknowledge his service. Lieutenant Shun, the young officer who had first shown him kindness, came over, his face beaming. "Mr. Miller, Sergeant Miller, I'm so glad General Thorne was here. What he did, it was right." Sam clapped him on the shoulder. "You did right too, Lieutenant. You showed compassion. That's a quality no army can afford to be without." Captain Harris, his face still reflecting a degree of mortification, also approached, his earlier sternness replaced by deep humility. "Sergeant Miller," he said, extending his hand, "I want to offer my sincerest apologies for the failure in our procedures this morning. There is no excuse. Your treatment was unacceptable. I assure you, we will be reviewing our protocols to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Sam shook his hand. "Thank you, Captain. That's all anyone can ask." He bore no malice. He understood that systems and the people within them could sometimes fail. What mattered was the willingness to acknowledge the failure and to learn from it. Sergeant Wilkes and Corporal Davies were nowhere to be seen. Sam suspected their remedial training had already begun, and he hoped, for their sake, and for the sake of the soldiers they might one day lead, that they would learn the true meaning of respect. As the crowd thinned, General Wallace Thorne made his way back to Sam and Eleanor. "Sam," he said, his voice warm, "Eleanor and I would be honored if you would join the family for a private reception back at their home. There are many people who would like to speak with you, to hear your stories, if you're willing to share them." Sam hesitated. He wasn't one for receptions, for being the center of attention. He had come to say goodbye to Artie, and he had done that. "General, I appreciate the offer, more than you know, but I think I need to head back. It's a long journey." Eleanor gently took his hand again. "Sam, please. Arthur spoke of you so often. He told the children, the grandchildren, so many stories about your time together. They feel as if they know you. It would mean so much to them, to all of us, if you could stay just for a little while." Looking into her kind, pleading eyes, Sam found he couldn't refuse. "All right, Eleanor," he said softly. "For Artie, and for you." The private reception was not the stuffy, formal affair Sam had feared. It was filled with warmth, with shared memories, with laughter and tears. Arthur's children and grandchildren, who had indeed grown up hearing tales of Uncle Sam Miller's wartime bravery, treated him like a beloved relative. They asked him questions, not about battles and glory, but about their father, their grandfather as a young man, as a friend. Sam found himself, surprisingly, opening up, sharing anecdotes he hadn't recounted in decades, painting a picture of the Artie he knew, the brave, sometimes scared, but always loyal young lieutenant who had faced death alongside him. He spoke of their shared hopes, their fears, the absurdities of war, the small moments of humor and humanity that had sustained them. General Thorne stayed for a while, listening intently, occasionally adding a detail from a story Arthur had shared with him over the years. It became clear that Arthur Pendleton, for all his stars and accolades, had never forgotten his roots, had never forgotten the men who had shaped him, especially Samuel Miller. The impact of the day's events began to ripple outward. Several journalists who had witnessed the dramatic intervention by General Thorne were already filing their stories. The narrative was too compelling to ignore. The forgotten hero, the bureaucratic slight, the powerful act of recognition by one of the nation's highest military leaders. It was a story about honor, about friendship, about the enduring spirit of the common soldier. The story of Samuel Miller and General Wallace Thorne at Arlington National Cemetery became a quiet sensation. It wasn't sensationalized with lurid headlines, but rather reported with a sense of respect and awe by the more thoughtful segments of the media. It resonated deeply with a public weary of political squabbling and hungry for genuine stories of integrity and honor. Veterans organizations across the country picked up the story, hailing General Thorne's actions as a powerful example of true leadership and camaraderie. The phrase, "Remember Sergeant Miller," became a quiet rallying cry for those advocating for better recognition and care for aging and forgotten veterans. For Sam, the immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of unexpected attention, albeit handled with grace and discretion by General Thorne's staff, who ensured he was shielded from intrusive media requests. Before Sam left Washington, General Thorne arranged for a private meeting at the Pentagon. In his own office, surrounded by flags and commendations, General Thorne presented Sam with a framed citation. "Sam," he said, "after what happened at Arlington, I had my staff do some digging. It seems there was indeed a recommendation for a Silver Star for you, submitted by Lieutenant Pendleton himself after chosen. It was lost in the chaos of the war, buried in archives for nearly 70 years. We found it, and the Army Decorations Board, on my recommendation, has unanimously approved its posthumous upgrade. Well, not posthumous anymore, thankfully, to the Distinguished Service Cross." He opened a velvet box to reveal the nation's second highest award for valor. "Sergeant Samuel Miller," General Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion, "for extraordinary heroism in action, far above and beyond the call of duty, it is my profound honor to finally present this to you." Sam stared at the medal, speechless, tears streaming down his weathered face. It wasn't the medal itself that mattered, but the recognition, the acknowledgement, after all these years, that what he had done, what they had all endured, had not been entirely forgotten. The presentation was quiet. No cameras, no fanfare, just two old soldiers, a shared history, and a debt of honor finally repaid. General Thorne also ensured that Sam's journey back to Pennsylvania was considerably more comfortable than his arrival. A staff car, a direct train ticket, and an open invitation to return to Washington as a guest of the Army whenever he wished. Back in his small hometown, Sam found that news of his Arlington adventure and his belated decoration had preceded him. He was no longer just the quiet, reclusive Mr. Miller. He was a hero. The local VFW post, which he had never joined, held a dinner in his honor. The mayor gave him a key to the city. School children wrote him letters. It was all a bit overwhelming for a man accustomed to solitude, but Sam handled it with his usual quiet dignity. He spoke little of battles, but much of friendship, of loyalty, of the importance of remembering all who served. He dedicated his Distinguished Service Cross to the memory of Arthur Pendleton and all the men of Baker Company who never came home. The most significant change, perhaps, was internal. The weight of being forgotten, the quiet sorrow he had carried for so long, had lifted. He still missed Clara, he still mourned Artie, but there was a new sense of peace, of his life having come full circle. He started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children. He even agreed to speak to a high school history class about his experiences, not focusing on the horrors of war, but on the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of compassion, and the enduring power of friendship. Lieutenant Shunn, the young officer from Arlington, kept in touch, calling Sam occasionally to check in. He reported that Captain Harris had indeed implemented new training protocols for cemetery security, emphasizing respect and historical awareness. Sergeant Wilkes and Corporal Davies, he heard, were now stationed at a remote supply depot in Alaska, hopefully learning valuable lessons in humility. General Wallace Thorne, in his remaining years as chairman, often spoke of Sergeant Samuel Miller in his addresses to new recruits and graduating officers, using his story as a powerful example of the quiet, foundational heroism upon which the entire military edifice was built. He reminded them that true honor was not about the stars on one's shoulder, but the integrity in one's heart, and that the greatest leaders never forget the sacrifices of the soldiers in the ranks. Samuel Miller lived out his remaining years in quiet contentment, his life a testament to the fact that heroism isn't always loud, and recognition, even when long delayed, can still heal old wounds and inspire new generations. The faded photograph of two grinning young soldiers remained on his bedside table, a reminder of a friendship that had transcended war, rank, and time, a friendship that had, in the end, ensured that a forgotten hero was finally remembered. The legacy of that remarkable day at Arlington extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. It sparked a national conversation about how America honors its veterans, particularly those from earlier, often overlooked conflicts like the Korean War. Documentary filmmakers and historians, inspired by Samuel Miller's story, began new projects aimed at capturing the experiences of these forgotten warriors before their voices were lost to time. The Remember Sergeant Miller Act was even proposed in Congress, a piece of legislation designed to streamline the process for reviewing and upgrading medal recommendations that have been lost or improperly processed due to the chaos of war, ensuring that other acts of valor did not go unrecognized for decades. General Wallace Thorne, in his capacity as chairman, quietly championed this initiative, using Sam's story as a powerful impetus for change within the military's own historical review boards. The result was a renewed effort to locate veterans whose heroism might have been overlooked, leading to several other belated recognitions and providing a measure of closure for families and surviving comrades. For Samuel Miller, life settled into a new kind of normal. The initial flurry of local attention subsided, but the respect he now received from his community was a constant, gentle presence. He became a beloved figure at the VFW post, not for his war stories, which he still shared sparingly, but for his quiet wisdom, his gentle humor, and his genuine interest in the lives of the younger veterans who sought his counsel. He found a particular joy in his volunteer work at the library, where the children, unburdened by the complexities of war and heroism, simply knew him as Mr. Sam, the kind old man who read stories with funny voices and always had a peppermint in his pocket. He never spoke to them of battles, but he did speak of courage, the courage to be kind, the courage to be a good friend, the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. These were the lessons he had learned, not just in the frozen mountains of Korea, but in the long, quiet years that followed. He kept the Distinguished Service Cross in a simple frame on his mantelpiece, alongside Clara's photograph and the faded picture of him and Artie. It wasn't a trophy of war, but a symbol of remembrance, a testament to a friendship that had endured, and a reminder that sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, the world can right its wrongs. He often thought of General Thorne, a man he had met only briefly, but who had changed the trajectory of his remaining years so profoundly. He understood that Thorne's actions had not been just for him, or even just for Artie, but for all the unsung Samuel Millers out there, for the principle that every sacrifice matters, every act of courage deserves to be honored. It was a statement about the soul of the military, about the enduring values that must be upheld from the highest echelons of command down to the newest recruit. And what of Sergeant Wilkes and Corporal Davies? Their Alaskan reassignment was reportedly a harsh lesson in humility. Stripped of the pomp of Arlington and the reflected glory of guarding the nation's elite, they were faced with the stark realities of service in a challenging and unforgiving environment. Whether they truly learned from their experience remained to be seen, but their stories served as a cautionary tale within the ranks about the arrogance of power and the importance of treating everyone, regardless of appearance or perceived status, with fundamental human dignity. Lieutenant Shun, inspired by both Sam's quiet resilience and General Thorne's decisive leadership, went on to have a distinguished career, always carrying with him the lessons of that day. To listen with an open heart, to question unjust protocols, and to never underestimate the story hidden behind an unassuming facade. Samuel Miller passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after that memorable day at Arlington, just shy of his 90th birthday. His funeral, held in the small Pennsylvania town he had called home for most of his life, was not a grand state affair, but it was attended by many whose lives he had touched. General Wallace Thorne, now retired but still a figure of immense respect, made the journey to be there, delivering a quiet, heartfelt eulogy that spoke not of battles won, but of a life well lived, a friendship cherished, and a quiet courage that had, in the end, spoken louder than any cannon. He laid a single white rose on Sam's casket, a final salute from one old soldier to another. The story of Samuel Miller serves as a powerful reminder that true heroism is not always draped in medals or announced by trumpets. It often resides in quiet courage, in steadfast loyalty, in the dignity with which one endures the trials of life and the indifference of the world. And sometimes it takes a leader of true vision and integrity to stop everything, to look past the superficial trappings of status, and to recognize and honor that quiet heroism, ensuring that it is not forgotten but celebrated, inspiring us all to look deeper, to listen more closely, and to remember the profound worth inherent in every human soul. If this story of enduring friendship and long overdue honor touched your heart, please share with others. And tell us in the comments, what does true heroism mean to you? Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories where the quiet voices of courage are finally heard.